Some of you may be aspiring to positions of leadership in the political arena, but the question is, why do you want to lead? In Africa, the shortest route to ill-gotten wealth is political leadership. If you want to get wealth without working for it at all, join African politics. That is the truth everywhere in Africa except for very few places. The only place that stands out now in that regard is Tanzania with President John Pombe Magufuli. The rest in Africa, I do not know. Excuse me, I'm a visitor. They hunt and gather buildings and cars and money. And that is why African leadership does not attract her best men and women. And African electorate also responds to money. I do not know whether it happens here in Africa, in Ghana. The African electorate also expects to be bribed so that they can vote. And until the day we are able to exercise the ghost of ethnicity, among other things, and the ghost of corruption in Africa, Africa will never get good leaders. Not be deluded that the world is full of benevolent individuals and institutions whose only claim to fame is that they want to lift Africa from the morass that she now finds herself in. The reality is, the poverty of Africa is the glory of some civilizations. Poverty is an industry. Ignorance is an industry. Big industry. And there are those who want Africa to continue to wallow in poverty and to wallow in ignorance because it is their safest bet to their continued benefit. The day we wake up to that reality, the safer we are. That is why the English had this beautiful saying, "Let sleeping dogs lie." So we are sleeping, and we are being allowed to lie. And we are being hypnotized into even greater sleep and slumber, to dream even further. But I'm telling us, if Africa is to realize our dream, we must wake up. If Africa is to win the lottery, we must buy the lottery ticket. Why are we ring fencing 30%? Let us ring fence 70%. It can't be done because it is a question of cross-fertilization of ideas. We must learn from other civilizations, but learning must not mean surrendering to them. I'm submitting to us that we surrender to them. And going forward, therefore, you who are present here, we must think of another Africa. An Africa where when we talk about technology, whether it is in solar technology today, Morocco, and I stand to be corrected, is engaged in developing one of the largest solar farms anywhere in the world. I'm still talking about consulting engineers even in that field. Kenya is doing another major solar project, and all African countries ought to be engaged in it. Namibia, I think, is also engaged in it. But if you ask who the consulting engineers are for those projects, they are not Africans. Even the solar panels that are going to be used, the best that African countries will do is to assemble them. They'll be brought as completely knocked down kits, and ours is to assemble them as our children assemble Lego. We are talking about water and water, which is an important thing, and water engineering. And we have consulting engineers in that regard. Even when we talk about water engineering and the drilling equipment, I know of no African country that makes water drilling equipment. Perhaps South Africa. South Africans correct me. When we are talking about road infrastructure, I know that sometimes even when we are doing the roads, even the one here, the Kampala and Entebbe Expressway, the contractors, under the guise of something that they now call design and build, will even import steel from their countries, saying that ours has too much carbon content. Sometimes even cement is imported because ours is claimed not to have certain ingredients. I'm still talking about consulting engineers. When we are doing our railways, we may celebrate them all we want, but when we receive the wagons, they are rehabilitated engines that belong to the museums alongside the spinning wheel. I'm submitting to us that the consulting engineer is important to Africa's growth and development. You cannot deny that. And I can see the vision. I can see what the African leaders were thinking about when they met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and came up with Agenda 2063. They were looking at the engineer and they were saying that the engineer, well, if he is a civil engineer, let him be an African civil engineer who is aware of the African terrain. Let him be an engineer who is equipped with what he or she needs to grow Africa, so that when he or she is engaged in designing and ultimately presiding over the building of African roads, he knows his or her continent. That is what they were thinking. So that when they are building this road across the continent, the equatorial forest of Congo, they are building and they are empowering other African engineers. I saw them thinking about that. They must have been thinking about hydroelectric power, and they were thinking about generating power from the nearly 1,270 hydroelectric power stations that we have built. They were thinking of geothermal, and they were thinking of consulting engineers who have African experience and know Africa and relate with other civilizations in a manner that is beneficial to Africa. They must have been thinking like that. When they were thinking about fuel, fossil fuel, and they were thinking about the pipeline, they must have been thinking about chemical engineers and other related engineers who would be doing things for the benefit of Africa. They were thinking about aeronautical engineers that would be capable not only of ensuring that the planes that are made in Europe and America fly, but who are moving progressively to ensuring that even Africa can produce an aircraft. The Brazilians have done it in our lifetime. But today, that is not the truth. So, fellow engineers, if I have dampened your spirit, that was my intention. Because it is those dampened spirits that are capable of providing a fertile ground for the fruit of growth to germinate. This continent is capable of achieving much. Africa today has a population of 1.1 billion. We are 55 countries, and all the 55 countries, our economy is only as big as that of India. We can do better. And if we are going to do better, I have no doubt in my mind that you great minds that are gathered here, because the minds that are present here are some of the best minds that Africa can offer. Let it not be business as usual. Let it not be that you have expanded your farm to include the 100 engineers to do work that has been handed down to you by some European or Chinese firm. No. Let it be that you are also capable of doing things in your own right. You can do it. You must do it. Because if you don't do it, the thing that we call growth will never be realized. We'll have symbols of what we describe as growth, but Africa will never grow. We'll have things that appear to represent growth, but Africa will never have grown. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to remind you and to remind myself that if Africa is to realize our potential in the world of infrastructure, because as the Vice President rightly said, if you have infrastructure, it has an impact on agriculture, it has an impact on mining, it has an impact on the health sector, it has an impact in every other sector in our economies. It can be done. It must be done. And you are the ones who are going to do it. And remember that the world is not very kind. All of us know. Every other person in every other part of the world is trying to ensure that they are at the top of the food chain. Where is Africa in the food chain? Are we at the bottom of the food chain, or we are at the top of the food chain? I am saying we are at the bottom, and going forward we must fight our way to ensure that we are beginning to talk about things like nanotechnology. What are we teaching in our universities? Most of our universities, faculties of engineering have equipment that were used in Europe during the industrial age. I'm saying this rather melodramatically, but I'm making my point. We must change. There must be a linkage between the practicing consulting engineer and the universities. There must be a linkage between that and industry. It cannot be right that in this day and age, that linkage is not there. And I believe that under the aegis of Gamma and FIDIC, it can be done, and that deliberate efforts are going to be made to ensure that we move in that positive direction, so that Agenda 2063 is realized and the promises under the Sustainable Development Goals are also realized. I want to conclude with this. Have you realized that several years ago we had something called the Millennium Development Goals? They were never achieved. So we have renamed them Sustainable Development Goals. And there are more now. So the truth is, Africa must also define her own problems, and having defined her own problems, must also find solutions to her own problem. Do not be cheated. Do not be deluded that the world is full of benevolent individuals and institutions whose only claim to fame is that they want to lift Africa from the morass that she now finds herself in. The reality is, the poverty of Africa is the glory of some civilizations. Poverty is an industry. Ignorance is an industry. Big industry. And there are those who want Africa to continue to wallow in poverty and to wallow in ignorance because it is their safest bet to their continued benefit. The day we wake up to that reality, the safer we are. That is why the English had this beautiful saying, let sleeping dogs lie. So we are sleeping, and we are being allowed to lie. And we are being hypnotized into even greater sleep and slumber, to dream even further. But I'm telling us, if Africa is to realize our dream, we must wake up. If Africa is to win the lottery, we must buy the lottery ticket. God bless you.
How do you put China in the same boxing ring with Eswatini? Eswatini has 1.2 million people. China has 1.4 billion people. And you put them on the same stage and say, go at it, negotiate. Are you with me?
Yes.
This is insanity of the highest order. How have we allowed this carnage to go on? When Eswatini is thrown in the same boxing ring with China and Eswatini collapses before Eswatini even gets on the stage, the world says, well, Eswatini, what's wrong with you? Why can't you take care of your people? Well, China came in and said, Eswatini, give me all your gold or else. And if Eswatini does not agree, they just go on next door to Lesotho and give Lesotho an extra $1. And if Lesotho doesn't take it, they just jump on to Togo, Central African Republic. It was all by design. 1884. They did something else in addition to chopping us up. They also set out to make the African believe that everything African was bad and undesirable, and everything Western, particularly French and British, was more desirable. We call that the legacy of colonization. Prior to that, they had started long working on the slaves. Make them think everything about them, forget anything about Africa. Where you come from is a horrible place, diseased and dying people, constantly at war with themselves, uncivilized. Cut out any communications with them. You need to just know what we tell you. And we call that the legacy of slavery. So that's where you look at where we are today. 135 years later, a system that was put in place to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated, that Africa is forever exploited, remains in place today, alive and well. And we sit here and we ask ourselves, why isn't Africa moving forward? Why does Africa continue to be taken advantage of? Well, I'll tell you why, very simply. Until Africa comes together as a continent speaking with one voice, one continent, one people, nothing, and I repeat, nothing is gonna change. As individual little African countries, we are wannabe boxers. We will never make it fighting against the heavyweights. We must speak with one voice. Yeah. And this is exactly what our Pan-African leaders wanted to see happen in 1963 when they came together in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. They clearly stated that Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, and that African Union was now. They said Africa must speak with one voice. It is the only way for Africa to take its rightful place on the world stage. Sadly, when they went to Addis Ababa in 1963, they were divided. We had two factions, the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group. The Casablanca group were saying Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, and African Union now. This was Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Only 7. The other 25 of the 32 who attended were the Monrovia group. They were the nationalists. They said, let's go slow. Let's kind of wait on this Pan-African thing. 55 years later, 56 this year, we're still going slow. As if it wasn't bad enough that we were divided up into the tiny little countries that we are today. The gift that Berlin Conference gave us. One other thing that France did between 1958 and 1961 in the name of giving us our independence as African countries. France forced the Francophone, and I hate that terminology. There is no such thing as Francophone, Anglophone. They made it up. But for the purposes of communication, I will use that. 14 of those countries, they said, in order for you to get your independence from us, you must sign this document. You thought they could have found a better name for the document. The document was called the Pact for the Continuation. I repeat, the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. We are talking about giving you independence, but sign this pact for the continuation of colonization in a different format. And I'm going to highlight some of those issues that they said you must agree to if you are going to be independent. Hello. Maybe we need to redefine the meaning of independence for the French. First, France said, you see, you monkeys, you don't know how to manage your money. We're going to demand that you deposit 85% of your bank reserves with the French Minister of Finance. Under the French Central Bank, under the control of the French Minister of Finance. France is then going to take your 85% bank deposits from each and every one of you. Deposit those funds in the French stock market under the French name. And you may or may not know the returns. Today, as we speak, the latest figures are saying for every 14 billion that France invests in the stock market from Africa, they are realizing upwards of 300 billion in return. Every year in, year out, because of these deposits from the African countries, France is taking out of Africa over $500 billion. Now figure it out. For every 14 billion, the returns on the investment are over 300 billion, and they are taking over 500 billion. So in actuality, France is taking out of Africa trillions of dollars year in and year out. From us poor people, Africans. Back to the pact. So should you want to access some of your money that you have deposited with France, you have to submit your country's financial returns. And if approved, you get to get it as a loan. You can only access up to 20% of your money year in, year out as a loan at commercial interest rates. Your own money. As if that was not enough. They said all your minerals discovered, yet to be discovered, all your oil discovered, yet to be discovered. France and French companies have the first right of refusal. If there's anything left over that the French companies do not want, your people might have. To this day. They said you will only use the currency that we created for you because you're special Africans. We call it the CFA. There was the Central African CFA and the Western African CFA, same animal. And that France is the only one that can print it for you. 1958. Fast forward. They're still printing it for us. And if you start misbehaving, they just stop printing your money. And your country's in trouble. They also said your language of instruction shall be French, whether you like it or not. That France will have military presence in your country. That your military can only be trained by France. That you can only buy military equipment from France. That you cannot have any military alliance with your neighbor. And that in the event of war, your allegiance is only to France. And furthermore, because they have military presence in your country, they can invade you without notice should they feel that the interests of France in your country are being violated.
Teach, sister, teach. Speak on, sister.
Fast forward, 2019, nothing has changed. The same people who have the audacity to tell us that we are poor countries, they are taking trillions out of Africa every year. And one might say, why is it that African leaders haven't done anything about this deplorable situation? Well, let me tell you, my brother and sister, they have tried. Documented to this day, 22 coups where leaders were assassinated. France had something to do with it. The first 7, when they decided they were pulling out of the CFA and that they're going to print their own money, they were assassinated. Every time an African leader has tried to do what's best for their country, they were assassinated. Majority of them aided by France. It's a known fact. And then others, they were just mercenaries who felt that when there was a natural resource discovered in one country, they wanted to create a coup. So while the country is thrown into a civil war, they're siphoning the natural resource. We know of one particular story that had we not known about it, it would have been, oh, there we go again, the Africans. In about 25 years ago, a group of young, rich white kids were having fun in Cape Town. They found out that there was oil in Equatorial Guinea that just been discovered and they wanted it. So they set out a plan to have a coup in Equatorial Guinea. So while the Guineans are busy fighting a civil war, they will be siphoning the oil. But they made one mistake. There were 2 planes. One was to leave South Africa, stop in Zimbabwe, pick up more ammunition on their way to hunt in Equatorial Guinea. Another plane was taking off in the Caribbean that had this puppet diaspora who was supposed to be the next president. Mugabe wondered why such young people needed such powerful ammunition to go hunt in Equatorial Guinea. In doing his research further, he found out that this was a coup in the making. He allowed them to land in Zimbabwe. They loaded their plane, and just before takeoff, they were all arrested. The ringleader of that group was none other than the son of the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Margaret Thatcher. She had to fly to Zimbabwe and paid handsomely to get her son out. The last one of those prisoners left Zimbabwe about 6-7 years ago. Had these young people succeeded, it would have been another coup. There you go, the Africans again. Such, my brothers and sisters, is the story of your Africa. They don't do coups anymore. They simply create instability. So when you hear of an instability in an African country, ask yourself, what is really going on? Because what they are telling you is really going on is just a shiny object. The real issue is over here. And you need to stop before you start being used as an instrument of your own self-destruction.
I'm a king, yes, I'm a king. I'm a king.
We are not fighting against whites. We are fighting to sit on the dinner table. White people, you will no longer eat alone. We are coming to sit on the dinner table, and if you are refusing us on the dinner table, we are going to destroy that dinner table. No one is going to eat until all of us in South Africa eat from the same dinner table. That's what we are fighting for. Why are you closing us out? Are you happy for 25 years? You are eating alone. We are watching you through a small window. It's enough. Sangena. Sangena get from the shop at the dinner table. You're going straight to the dinner table. No one is going to exclude us here. If you want to be excluded because you want to appear nice before white people, go on. Right now we are talking the truth here. We are not fighting whites. We have never called for their killing. Hey, the only thing we've called is, let's sit together on the dinner table. You are no longer going to sit alone. It is not sustainable. It is dangerous to continue sitting alone. One, the table may be destroyed. le ba tsamaya ka re re ra tlo tsamaya ke ape mase a go bona le ba tsamaya tsoka tlo tsela ra di tlina ra shela re dia ke tsa rena ke di mine tsa rena ke di banka tsa rena ke di farm tsa rena ke di insurance policy tsa rena. There is no one who brought land here. You either share the land or go to the next slide.
First of all, let me thank you. I've prepared 2 papers which I believe will be circulated because they'll not be projected. But if you can see, first of all, I want to agree with the Honorable Minister. I've done 2 pictorials. One of them is described as Africa at the dinner table. And if you look at Africa at the dinner table, Africa is on a plate and it is meat. And the diners at the dinner table are France, the United Kingdom, the United States, the European Union, the Chinese, and progressively the Arabs. And my second picture is the African hotspots. It's not visible from there. But if you look at Africa today and you make a clean sweep with your mind, there are different conflicts of different intensity in Somalia, in northern Mauritania, in northern Mali, in Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Guinea-Bissau, in the Cameroons, in South Sudan, and one can go on and on. And there is a sense in which Africa has always been alive to the question of interference. I will refer this audience, particularly those who are starting, to take time and read the 32 odd speeches that were made in the month of May 1963 by the then heads of states and government of independent African states, the 32 of them. And there are 2 speeches that I want to isolate for this presentation. One was by David Dacko of Central African Republic. And in thanking Emperor Haile Selassie and Kwame Nkrumah on that day, he said that we must never forget that the colonial power has not left us. We must recognize that he did not go willingly. And if we don't check them, they'll come back again. And what would little Central African Republic do against them? Today, he is right. Today, if we remember the activities of France and how they have propped up the regime of Jean-Bedel Bokassa, he was right. Today, as the Honorable Minister has indicated, Africa remains the only continent in the world that is referred to in these terms, Anglophone, to mean that we are a sphere of our erstwhile colonizers. About 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting of the Commonwealth in London, England. And a friend of mine who is an Anglophile sent me the photograph very gleefully, saying this is a meeting of 53 equal states. I told him, no. If it was so, why is it that the leadership of the Commonwealth is hereditary rather than rotational? In other words, in the minds of the British, her former colonies are still under her tutelage. And I want to submit to us that in the minds of what I'll call the conceptual West, they think they have a divine duty to instruct Africans what to do. True. And in the minds of many African leaders, they think that they have a divine duty to accept what they are told. That, in my view, is what the Honorable Minister was talking about, the mindset. And this is something that has been examined. We have seen France, and it's very pernicious presence in Africa. We know what they did in Burkina Faso against Thomas Sankara. We know what they did in Mali or the Sudan against Modibo Keita or against Sekou Touré in Guinea. Pernicious to the core. The Portuguese, we know what battles had to be fought in that area. And let me put this very bluntly. When the former leader of Portugal, Marcelo Caetano, was asked, why can you not allow the colonies to gain independence? This is what he said in substance. As I have examined world history over the years, the following have emerged. That the Caucasians have been responsible for monumental discoveries in the development of man. So have the Chinese, so have the Arabs. But the Africans have been responsible for nothing. They are only fit as hewers of wood and drawers of water. And I want to submit to you who are present here that in the conceptual West and guarded moments, that is what they think. And that is how they relate to Africa. So the whole idea that they will interfere is something that they think is their God-given duty. I said there were two speeches in 1963 that I wanted to refer to. I referred to David Dacko. The second one was the speech by Kwame Nkrumah. And Kwame provided the solution. He did not complain about colonialism. He said, we must live here with one army, with one command. We must live here with one currency. We must live here with one currency, one country. I do not know where its capital will be, but I suggest Leopoldville or Bangui. Other leaders may have their thoughts. Kwame was right, but who listened to him? Several years down the line, and I've said it in my paper, there were coup d'etats which were engineered, there were mutinies which were engineered, and other forms of destabilization. And I want to believe that the person who actually said it very well in the 1980s was the former American President Ronald Reagan. He said, the United States of America does what is in her best interest. And I agree with him. Does Africa do what is in her best interest? Do African leaders do what is in the best interest of Africa? Interference will be there in very blatant and brazen ways and in subtle ways. I've always asked, until very recently, how many African countries manufactured bullets? Very few. Until very recently, how many African countries, in fact, how many African countries manufacture jet fighters? How many African countries are involved in the arms industry? Some of the leading conceptual West countries which pontificate to us about prizes, peace prizes, are the leading manufacturers of landmines. And if you look at their foreign exchange earners, it is the military and security items. So they say with their mouths, what do they not believe in their hearts? In Kiswahili we say, vita vya panzi furaha ya kunguru. That when the locusts are fighting, it is the joy of the hawk. Because when they kill each other, they get the food easily, dead. It is in the best interest, I dare submit, without fear of contradiction, that the elite in the conceptual West does not want Africa to stabilize, despite their assertion to the contrary. And you'll see it in every country, because conflict is a major industry. Today, you look at South Sudan and the many peace conferences that are being held, but if you ask who supplies the arms, who provides safe havens, it is the conceptual West. And when I use the term conceptual West, I'm saying that it extends to countries which are geographically not in the West, like Australia or Canada. So I'm submitting in answer to your question, Joe, that interference is there, and it is part, to use this old cliche, of the neo-colonial project. The neo-colonial project requires that Africa must remain within the sphere of influence of these states. Today, if you look at the United Kingdom, which has left Europe, one would have thought that those are their cousins and that they should sit in comfort with them. You will now see their involvement being de-emphasized in Europe and their interest and appetite growing towards the Commonwealth. Because in the Commonwealth, they are the major domos. They'll tell us what to do. In Europe, they have to grapple with the Germans and the French, and they don't like it. That is the unspoken bit of it. The French also are in Europe, but the Germans are too strong, and they don't like it. So they want to hold Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, and tell them what to do. I do not know how many of you saw the press conference that was attended by President Macron of France and Nana Addo of Ghana. And when Nana Addo spoke as an African should, you could see the body language of the French president. How dare this man speak this way? In other words, I'm saying that interference is the mother's milk of European economies. But to answer your second question, they have their own recruits who Professor Philip Nying'oro will be speaking here. To use the old vocabulary of those days, they have the people you call their comprador bourgeoisie. You must remember. The comprador bourgeoisie are Africans with black faces, but essentially they are doing the bidding of these powers. They are the ones, you'll find them in different spheres, and they will be present. They are in your cabinet, but they are actually representatives of the foreign intelligence agencies of those countries. We know this. If you look at the declassified papers from the United States, we now know that some of leading cabinet ministers in many African countries were working for the CIA or some Western agencies. So you are sitting in cabinet, and in these days of the mobile phone, they are possibly texting their masters in Europe and America. So interference is also exacerbated by these comprador bourgeois for their own benefits, and it has never changed, Honorable Minister. In the early days of slavery, they gave some of the chiefs mirrors and alcohol. Today, what they give them are flats in Paris or in Dubai, and that is what makes them undermine Africa. The third mode of interference is through institutions. Look at the competition as it is now. There is a new entrant into the market that is called China. China is very subtle. Many people wrote the obituary of Rwanda in 1994. 20 years down the line, it has been demonstrated that Africans can actually do it. Between 1983 and 1987, I think Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso also demonstrated that it can be done. We saw in Somalia, despite their problem. So my prescription is African unity. Africa must now begin to negotiate initially in terms of blocks, SADC, ECOWAS, East African Community, and ultimately as African Union. And lo and behold, we must do it. And I've always said this cliche, we must do it, because if we don't do it, we will be done. Thank you.